Taoiseach, I want to raise the climate crisis with you. Today we see the devastating report from the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council and the Climate Change Advisory Council, and they tell us that on your current trajectory, your government is clearly going to miss our legally binding 2030 climate targets. We all know the consequences of that failure will be enormous, and that's set out in the report. €26 billion in fines and, of course, the really serious impact upon generations to come who will see a future stolen from them. A generation who rely on us now to take the necessary actions to cut our emissions, to tackle climate change and to protect our biodiversity. Taoiseach, the report is significant, but it's not really news, because you and your government colleagues must have known about the missed targets and this projection, because you've seen so many public bodies already telling you about government failure on this, the SEAI and the EPA, for example. And while an ignorant failure of policy could be forgiven, this is a conscious failure of political will, and there is no accountability for this failure either. I want to quote something you said in this House last week, Taoiseach. You said that you had noticed, I think from opposition, you had noticed this, a deliberate attempt to present this government as rowing back on climate change. And you said that there had been no resiling by this government from climate action. But in fact, there's been a clear rowing back, Taoiseach, hasn't there? A clear rowing back from the position on climate taken by the previous government, of which the Green Party was a member. And here's some examples. Just months after denying that this would happen, you are now going to import dirty LNG into our country, and you've abandoned, in your programme for government, the spending ratio for active travel and public transport. Your programme will instead favour the building of roads, baby roads, as Trump might say. Incredibly, your programme for government makes no reference to the legally required carbon budgets or to sectoral emission ceilings which might set a pathway for achieving net zero. Taoiseach, we all know that Ireland's 2021 climate law sets a 2030 target for reducing emissions by 51%, and crucial to achieving that target and setting us on the right pathway are our 3 5-year carbon budgets. So this process is very important, and it envisages review by the Oireachtas on an ongoing basis. It makes the Climate Minister responsible for updating the annual Climate Action Plan. But Taoiseach, the Minister has not published this year's new Climate Action Plan, despite the fact that we're now in the 3rd month of 2025. There's no Oireachtas Climate Committee, and Taoiseach, therefore, there's very little opportunity for accountability. You won't even facilitate the flow of information. It seems all reports of the Climate Action Delivery Board have now been removed from the gov.ie website. So it seems that climate is not a priority for your government, despite your protestations to the contrary, and it seems you are making no effort to meet the 2030 targets. Taoiseach, I have one burning question. Do you admit that the legally binding climate targets will not and cannot be met by your government?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, first of all, I'd put it to Deputy, I would reject what you have said. Agus is léirgur an géir céim arála an ceannas tochtaí atá os cór na dála seo. Agus tá mídna sa réite seo ag déanamh gach céin iarracht daileáil leis an bhaib sin, agus tá sin le feiscint ón méid ina sríochta tá chur isteach againn I balasathe éagsúla a bhaineann leis an géir céim arála. First of all, Deputy, there is no resiling or rowing back from our commitment to climate change or to addressing the issue of climate change, because it is existential to our society and to the world at large. And we're absolutely committed to delivering on our targets and on our responsibility. And I don't accept your analysis. I think the last 4 years were very significant, and the last government took very decisive action in respect of fundamental issues pertaining to climate, not least the commitment to offshore renewables, in addition to the onshore renewable story. But if you look at the EPA's most recent emissions inventory report from July, showing a decrease of 6.8% in Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions in 2023. It's the lowest that greenhouse gas emissions have been in 3 decades, below the 1990 baseline. And this is despite a population increase of over 1.5 million people since 1990, the addition of over 1 million new homes since 1990, and over 1 million extra vehicles on our road. In many respects, when you juxtapose the growth in population, growth in economic activity to the reduction in emissions, it's quite a remarkable story in terms of what Ireland has achieved, but it's not enough. And, particularly in electricity, industry, agriculture, residential, all showed decreases in emissions. And I think that is significant. And there's huge spending. I mean, IFAC are saying spend more. We are spending on the grid. We are spending on retrofits. We're spending right across the board. Fertiliser use has come down. And we have to deal with realities as they present themselves. We have to bring people with us as well in respect of climate change. On your phrase, dirty LNG, the memo today is about energy security. We have a responsibility that if anything was to happen or interrupt our current gas supplies, we do need a backup. And it would be irresponsible not to do that. And also we're doing it consistent with the European frameworks and consistent with the legal advice, by the way, that we've received in respect of that issue also. So I don't think it's good enough for you to just kind of throw that aside as dirty LNG. There's a fundamental question, because if something happened and all the risk assessments have been done, and if those gas supplies that we're currently importing were interrupted, I'd like to see what you'd be saying in this House when the economy would crash.
Deputy Advice.
Well, Taoiseach, I think we can agree on one thing, that climate change is indeed existential. The threat of climate change is clearly existential. You're not making every effort. Clearly not. The trajectory of this government is on course to miss climate targets. And to say otherwise flies in the face of the evidence that's being presented to you and to all of us by these bodies. The whole thing is reminiscent, Taoiseach, of your reliance on inflated home delivery targets in the general election. You can't rely on a target that you know you won't achieve. And, you know, I think across government there must be an awareness of this. And indeed, if the Taoiseach was furious at the €120,000 spent on the scanner in the National Gallery, he's going to be incandescent about the €26 billion fine that the government's going to be facing when we miss these targets in 2030. So, Taoiseach, I'll ask you again, given that the current trajectory of this government is on course to miss climate targets, what will you change? What will you change immediately to ensure that we will meet our climate targets? Or can you admit to this House that you will not be able to meet them?
Taoiseach.
You seem to have deliberately used the upper range